Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, April. I have known April for a long time, and she is a fireball. You guys are lucky to be part of her business and part of her vision. Most of you guys are moms, right? That's what I thought. And so, like you, I'm a mom. I have 2 boys. I have my son Frank, who is almost 9, and he's in 3rd grade. And then I have Mitchell, who I lost in 2014 after a lifelong battle with leukemia. And I'll tell you more about that journey in just a minute. But also, like you, I have a direct sales business. I'm a consultant for Rodan & Fields. So I understand what the work that you guys are doing. I understand that sometimes you have to kind of get out of your own head. You've got to get out of your comfort zone. You believe in what you're doing. You know that you have a great product, but making that ask and getting yourself outside of that is hard. You may have read the book, Get Over Your Damn Self. You know, it's like you just get over, and I think it's written by a Rodan & Fields consultant. But one thing I will tell you is you are very fortunate with Fund2Noodle. You are on the ground floor. And I remember in 2004, someone coming to me about Rodan & Fields and saying, you know what, and I thought, no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. And I wish I had, because it's been a little over a year that I've had my business, and I cannot tell you how many times I've said, I wish I had started this sooner. So kudos to you for stepping outside your zone and really finding a way to empower yourself and your family with flexibility, because as you'll hear in my story, I have been, my entire career has been as an entrepreneur of home-based businesses. April mentioned my marketing agency. So a little about me. I grew up in Mississippi. You're probably going to hear that in the way that I talk. And I graduated from Ole Miss, and I came to Charlotte. And that was in 1998. It was 20 years ago this year. In 2003, I decided that I was not, it was right after 9/11. The job market was, the economy was not good. And I wanted to be a marketing director, and I was not able to find that job, so I created it for myself. And I went out and started marketing myself and getting clients as a consultant. I ran the business from my home. I did that, and then in 2009, my first child, Frank, was born. And he was precious. It rocked my world, just like all first babies do. And just as I had planned, my life plan was all set. My second child was born 3 years later. I mean, it couldn't have been more planned. The year that Mitchell was born was 2012. He was born in February. He would be turning 6 this month, at the end of the month. He was born on the 4th anniversary of my mother's death. And so I really felt like that made him extra special, because as I was going through my pregnancy with him, I kept thinking, God is giving me this joy so that instead of focusing on the anniversary of Mama's death, I'm going to focus on planning a birthday party for this baby. And I just really, you're going to hear, my message has a strong Christian theme. I believe that is one reason I've been able to get through all this. So you'll hear that in my story. So Mitchell was born, and everything was great. We had 2 children rocking our world. My marriage was not the greatest, but you have small children. You think it's just, I didn't have time to put too much focus on it. And so, as tradition has in my family, around 3 months old, we planned Mitchell's baptism, because there is a family heirloom dress that is made for small babies, and I birth big babies. So we needed to do that quick. And being that part of my business was event planning, and I knew I was going to have 2 boys and not be able to plan the wedding of my dreams, I had a large and lavish baptism luncheon. And so after the baptism, we were at the Duke Mansion. You guys may be familiar with that. We had lots of people from our church there. And I took Mitchie in to change his gown, change him into the little, jumper that I had brought for him. And I noticed that afternoon that there were these, on his little legs, they weren't but about that long, that there were these little bruises. And I thought, well, it's cold in here. And fortunately, we were in a position, I had a nanny who was helping me, and she said the same thing. I said, well, just maybe there's something in this gown. Maybe there's some sort of chemical from where they had it stored. You know, I just kind of didn't think about it. Well, the next morning was Monday, and she comes in, 8 o'clock. I'm already at my desk working because, you know, being the entrepreneur, headstrong, I mean, very successful. The day before Mitchell was born, I finalized the biggest contract in the history of my business. I mean, we had been negotiating. I was like, my Lord, if you do not sign this agreement. But anyway, so I mean, things were rocking in my world, and it was amazing. I mean, I was on top of the world. And so the nanny comes in and she says, Meg, are those bruises still on his legs? And I said, yes. I said, he was asleep in his swing. And she said, I think you need to call the doctor. And I said, okay. And this is a more mature, Pat was in her 60s, maybe early 70s. And so, you know, she's been around through life a lot more than me. And I just said, okay. So I called, it was like 8:15, hadn't had a shower, nothing. Was still in my yoga pants and probably the shirt from yesterday. And I told the doctor, I said, he's got these bruises on his legs. She goes, put him in the car and come right now. And I thought, well, that, you know, so of course I Google it immediately. I thought something had gotten in through the soft spot, maybe had meningitis. I mean, I just, you know, so, and also because with my first child, I had been so nervous Nelly, so afraid. My mother had just passed away, so I didn't have my mother. I wore those doctors and nurses out. I called all the time. They would say, Miss McElwain, we just don't think. I was like, well, I have good insurance, so we're going to come on in. we're going to be there in just a minute if you've got a spot for us. So I was determined with Mitchell I wasn't going to be that way. But I took him in and, of course, had a good relationship with my doctor. And he said, when we got in, you know, Dr. Giftos examined him, and he said, Meg, has, you know, Big Brother been wrestling with him? I was like, no. He said, well, we're going to run a blood panel. And I said, okay. So he comes back into the room just a few minutes later, and I mean, very quickly. And I could tell something was wrong. His voice was more rapid. He said, Meg, he said, we've called the hospital. I said, okay. And, you know, I'm holding Mitchell. He said, I want you to go straight to the hospital. Do not go home. I said, okay. He said, do not go home. He just kept saying that. He said, they're getting a bed ready for you. And I said, what? Stop. What exactly? I said, stop. What are you saying? What are you saying to me? What's happening? And he said, Meg, the best case is there is an infection in his blood. The worst case is he's got cancer. And I literally, at that moment, it was almost like such shock. It truly was like a vacuum sound is the best way. I mean, it was like, vroom. And I just, all I could think is I went into immediate step. How was I going to get through this? What was I going to do? And I mean, so we get to the hospital. I called Mitchell's father, my former husband, and said, this is what you need to pack. Come now. Come now. And he is in a panic. My nanny is crying. And so that tells me, I mean, it was, you know, so we get to the hospital. We get there about 9:15. By 9:30, they take Mitchell and I into a procedure room, and they have to find a vein to run an IV. This is a tiny baby, y'all. I mean, this is him at birth. He was probably about 2 weeks old with Frank there. But I mean, he was still not a big baby. And so I can vividly remember laying over him on that table because he was screaming and they couldn't find the veins. They had to poke him several times, and I was singing to him. One of the things that has been so therapeutic and helped me through my survival is music. And I was raised in a church, in a very small church. I grew up singing, and I love hymns. And so I remember singing Seek Ye First to Him. And then I probably sang Alleluia #1. And then How Great Thou Art. And so I just was running through the hymns. and got him, they started a blood transfusion. I hadn't even been at the hospital 3 hours, and my child, you hear the word blood transfusion, and now I'm just like, oh yes, pretty simple, whatever. But I mean, these are things that I'd never been exposed to. I had never been this close to cancer. And you know what it's like when your child is sick. You know what it's like when they have a fever. Well, the doctors are coming in and out of the room, the nurses, it was just a flurry of activity. Word was, I had posted on social media because I wanted all the prayers I could get. So people in the community, because of my work in the community, people who had relationships with the hospital, where they'd be board members, they'd be doctors, someone had called someone else, people started visiting, and that became a little bit overwhelming. But it was also comforting. It was also comforting to know I wasn't alone. By noon, they told us that Mitchell, they were pretty sure he had white blood cell cancer. I did not know that was leukemia. Had no idea that was leukemia. By 5 o'clock, they told us that he had leukemia. It was rare, which all pediatric cancer is rare. Leukemia is a good cancer to get, though, if you're over the age of 2. If you're under the age of 2, the prognosis is very grim because your body just is so small, and they told me he had a 40% chance of survival and that we were going to be in treatment, most of that living in the hospital for the next 2 years. And again, just shock. And by this point, my mother-in-law who has now passed away from cancer as well. She was on her way from Virginia to help us. I mean, we were just like, I had this healthy 3-year-old at home who had been on a schedule, whose mama had been there, and all of a sudden his world was being rocked. So for the first 30 days, Mitchell's father, we both stayed in the hospital together, and my mother-in-law stayed. It was, but then as you start to realize 2 years is a long time, my former husband went home to be with little Frank, and I kind of battened down the hatches at the hospital. They gave me office space. I continued to run my business because, I had a huge contract. When Mitchell was diagnosed, we were in the final week of due diligence on a new home. We moved forward, we bought the home. So we were moving, trying to sell a property in the middle. Chaos and stress beyond belief. Mitchell achieved, but I was in such shock, and I believed Mitchell would beat this. I just knew God was not going to take my baby. He was not going to take my baby. And so Mitchell achieved remission the first round because they told us that we caught it early. But he still had to continue the next 18 months of treatment. So after 65 days, they released us and let us take him home. They sent a home health nurse. Oh, by this point, he had a port. He had a port in his heart. That happened the second day of diagnosis, where they go into the main artery of his heart, and they put a port where he can have his blood transfusions, where all of his chemo is taken. Now, chemo is intended to break the body completely down. What they want to do is get your blood count to 0 so that you can grow healthy blood cells. So Mitchell was at death's door pretty regularly. So we were in isolation. That's why he had so many blood transfusions, because he needed the blood. As soon as the chemotherapy would come out in his diapers. And chemotherapy also is very hard on your system. So you're using the bathroom a lot. It's coming out. So it was constant changing the diaper, because the diaper could not be against his skin because it would burn his skin. At one point, we were admitted into the pediatric ICU because he had diaper rash so bad. And there were open sores, and they were afraid he was going to get an infection. And the infection would go into the bloodstream, and he couldn't fight it. So it was daily, just shock upon shock. There were days that, because of the steroids or the drugs he was taking, he would scream uncontrollably. And all I could do was, stand and say, "It's okay. I'm right here. I'm right here." And I had to train myself to just stay calm, because he needed to see me calm so that the child needs to see that their parent is okay, and so that they feel maybe that they're going to be okay. He would cry, he would scream. I did a lot of singing. I kept the room very quiet. I had sound machines going at all times. And so they eventually sent us home, and they sent a home health nurse. I had to learn how to run an IV in my home. Every night I would have to run fluids into the IV in his heart. That's pretty overwhelming when you think about, what if I do something wrong? And my former husband, the marital problems we had marital problems prior. And one thing about a diagnosis like this is whatever's going on in the marriage prior or with either person, it's only going to be magnified when you add this much stress, unless you've got somebody that's tough as nails, which I happen to be tough as nails by the grace of God. And I will own that. I'm proud of that. Because I do think that's part of the reason I have survived. I think part of it's just my DNA. I mean, I wish I could tell you, but there were a lot of external things. But anyway, so my husband was having a hard time, so we decided I would be the primary administrator of all the drugs. We administered morphine regularly. My child was taking Xanax to keep him relaxed. I was running the IV. I had to learn to give him shots to boost his blood count. And it was awful. It was just horrible, but I did it. We got through it. About a year into treatment, my former husband really was struggling and had to admit that he had become addicted to Oxycontin. And it was something that he'd been doing recreationally since before our older child was born. So now I knew where the marital problems had come from. Part of them. So I called my minister because all of our insurance was through him. I was terrified we were going to lose our insurance, and we had 100% coverage of Mitchell. And we put him into rehab, and I couldn't tell. Even my closest friends did not know. My family, 600 miles away, knew, but my church. I could not have survived that without my church. Also around that time, a child that we had become close to in the hospital got a diaper infection. And they put her on life support, and she died. And that's when I shaved my head, because I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I was literally going insane, is what I felt. And I was under the care of a doctor. So I will tell you, mental illness is real. It is something that you cannot always handle alone. Do not be afraid to ask for help. In my situation, sometimes people say, oh, well, you had an excuse. Listen, it can happen whether you have an excuse or not. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Or if you have someone in your family, there should be no shame. Extreme stress and difficult life circumstances can put something on you because that's essentially, I still deal with a lot of post-traumatic stress. So we get near the end of Mitchell's treatment. I could see the finish line. It was in February. It was about this time, actually. It was right before his second birthday. I was already trying to contact the swimming pool to find out if I could have a pool party to end chemo treatment, because he was going to have his port removed. He's going to be able to be a normal child. So I'm going to show y'all a couple of pictures because the week after, so this is before diagnosis. This is when he came home for the first time. That's him and Frank. That's when he was in remission. He loved brother. We called him brother. Little Frank's brother. And Mitchie was Mitchie. A week after this picture was taken, see the little bruises on his head? He and little Frank were playing, and Mitchell got a bad bloody nose just from barely falling. And so I took him in, and the doctors, we really thought we were in the home stretch. And one of the oncologists said, Meg, I want us to go in and do a bone marrow aspiration, because we would have to do those regularly, where they put him under. They had a needle, I promise it was about this long. They would go in, they did a spinal tap. These are very dangerous procedures. They became regular things for us. And she said, I just want to go in and check. And I said, okay. Well, that afternoon she came and she said, Meg, we have something we need to tell you. The cancer is back, and it is in almost 80% of his bone marrow. We're going to have to start treatment all over again. And we're going to have to get him ready for a bone marrow transplant. And I knew, I remember as vividly, I knew when she told me that my baby was probably going to die. That's when I knew. And I also knew that unlike when you are initially diagnosed, you have to have hope the whole time, but you go into it blindly. You don't know what's ahead of you. I knew what was ahead of me. I knew what starting over was going to look like for my child. I knew what it looked like for my family. And then as we started to meet with the bone marrow doctors, I started to understand what it meant to go through a bone marrow transplant. They were going to have to make a special mask for my child to wear. We were going to have to bolt him to a table, put him into a machine for 4 days straight in radiation to burn him. It was just, I couldn't, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And so, I said, okay, well, you can't stop. You have to keep going. You cannot say, no, I'm not going to treat my child. Because then, you have to have hope. You have to keep going. I'm so thankful for my church. And so we did the first, I can remember this too, we did the first round of chemo, and the oncologist, the male oncologist on the team, who I adore, he said, Meg, we would say we're going to go one more round. We're going to hit him one more time. That was kind of the language you started to use. And the first round was so hard on his liver and kidneys that he started to go into liver and kidney failure. But they never said that to me. But his abdomen would get more and more distended. I was having to keep him on morphine regularly. I could tell they were watching us very closely on the floor. We were still out on the floor. We weren't in ICU. My marriage was a shambles. I was essentially going through this with his nanny. Still, nobody knew what had happened with the marriage. I just had to put a Band-Aid on it and keep going. And they eventually moved us into the ICU. And I could tell his abdomen just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we were running, we were trying. They came into the room one night and they said, Meg, we need you. We're going to have to put Mitchell on a respirator. That's life support. I went in about 3 o'clock in the morning because we had good insurance. They let me keep my room on the floor. So I would go in there and sleep for a couple hours, and I went in, and Mitchell was in such distress that he was either going to have a heart attack or stroke in front of me. And I went to him, and then they said, we need you to step out. And they pulled a curtain, and he slowly got quieter. And we put him into a medically induced coma. He was that way for about, time starts to run together, less than a week. I was there when he died. He died the day before we turned the machines off. I was standing at his bedside early one morning, and I was singing to him. And his head was here, and his little feet were here, and I was holding his hand, and I was just patting his little head. And all of a sudden, he squeezed my hand, and his eyes fluttered, and we didn't see any more life in him after that. And the next day, they said, Meg, there's not anything else we can do. What do you want to do? And I said, it's time. He's gone. Let's turn it off. And so we left the hospital, and we had a funeral. And for the next year, I didn't really go very many places. My hair started to grow out. That's where I got this long hair. And I was like, I like this. Let me see what I can do with this. And, you know, I just had to learn to rebuild. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that have helped me in coming back from this. First, not long after Mitchell was diagnosed, we realized that we had full coverage of our insurance. We were not going to need, but we had this great community of people who wanted to raise money for us. And because my business was so successful, we were in a good financial position. And so I made the gift to the Novant Health Foundation to establish Mitchell's Fund so that we could start receiving the money that people wanted to give to us personally. Because I thought, I don't want to turn this money away. There are families in this hospital that need this money. And so as Mitchell's illness went, I continued to work, but I also was essentially taking all the skills, all the marketing, PR, communication skills that I had been using for other nonprofits. I took that and put it toward the advancing Mitchell's Fund and raising money to help other families. And that just became so therapeutic. I think that relapse was where the biggest change came in me because, like I talked about, I knew what was ahead of me. That's when I knew that I did not want to work for other people in the capacity of Magnolia Marketing anymore. I didn't want to have to leave my child. I didn't want to be under someone else's. I mean, we're all, when you have a customer service, you always have to have the relationship. But I wanted full control. And I didn't want to negotiate big deals anymore. And I didn't want to have to go sit in meetings anymore and leave my children if I didn't have to. And so I decided after Mitchell died, the business dried up. My CPA was like, what are you doing? Are you not going to sell it? I was like, I'm done. No, I'm not selling it. I'm done. And for the past, he'll be gone 4 years in April. For the past 4 years, I have done the work of Mitchell's Fund, started a Rodan and Fields business to keep my cash flowing because I do not earn income from Mitchell's Fund, and I never will. I do not want that. That money goes to help other families. I have a little eBay business that keeps some cash flowing for me. I have left the marriage. I left the marriage 2 years ago, and my son and I are, we all do what we need to do, but I'm not in that relationship any longer, and I'm very grateful for that. And this year, I have launched a blog at megmcelwain.com where I share stories from our personal experiences so that I can empower other people. I feel like God gave this to me. I don't think God gave my child cancer. I think the cancer is, I witnessed what evil looks like on this earth. I saw it, and I know that's what that was. God never left me. He never left me. I felt His presence every single day. And I got mad at Him for a minute when Mitchie relapsed. And for a couple of days, I couldn't talk to Him. I was just like, why have you left? What in the world? And then I realized that I could not get through the rest of it without Him. And when it got so bad at the end, and I knew that that baby was not meant to be healthy here, I started to beg God to take him. Because I knew that we had to release him from the suffering he was experiencing here. Because I'm telling you, I miss my child, but watching that baby suffer was harder than every single day I lived without him. Because I couldn't do anything but stand there and say, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I'm right here. You're all right. Shh. And I'm telling you, that's a hard feeling. That's a very hard feeling as a mother, and I'm sure you can relate to that. So, what I want you to take away from this is that whatever you are struggling with, you have the power within yourself. There's also a greater power that you have. If that is what you choose, you have to seek it, but it is there. And for me personally, I could not have gotten through what I went through without my faith and my relationship, because I lost friends. People didn't know how to respond to me. They go on with their life, and it was a lonely, lonely time. My marriage, I didn't have my marriage to lean on. My parents are gone. But I leaned on that relationship with God. And I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So I want you to hear very loud and clearly that I cannot quote Bible verses, but I have a firm foundation in my relationship with God, and I'm really grateful for that. Another thing is how you show up every day has an impact on your mindset. And for me personally, especially as a mother, you know, when your kids get up in the morning, it all goes out the window because you're taking care of them. So one thing that I do is I wake up a little bit early. I purposely get out of that bed. I even factor into that time 10 minutes for me to lay in the bed and hit snooze. But I get up early so that I can get up in my own space. I can drink that first cup of coffee so I'm not ready to strangle somebody or kick the dog. And I am able to, I just think, I try to, no matter what is happening in my life, I try to think about something positive. When there are negative things happening, I do my best to say, show me what you want me to do, Lord. And that helps me. It helps me start my day. Because as the day goes on, you get busy, you get caught up in everything, but I find that starting my day with that time for me, I mentioned music. I love music. I love hymns. I love Tupac. So it just depends on my mood. I mean, sometimes I'm at the gym and I've got Tupac going. Sometimes it's Bob Seger. Pink. I love Pink. So I'm really excited that she's going to be singing tonight at the Super Bowl. So, you know, that's something that I lean on. I try to surround myself with positive people. You know, the energy that we have around us is, you know, relationships are something that is a strength for me. And so I have a lot of friends. I'm very lucky. But sometimes I have to move away from someone I always want to support people, but, you know, sometimes you have to protect yourself and you have to protect your family. And in a time of crisis, or really just in any time, you know, especially as we get older and as women, we are who keeps our family together. I mean, you know, the man, he's worth something. We haven't quite figured that out. As women, you have to really, self-care is important. I've tried to find time to do some sort of exercise. When Mitchell was sick, I did not have time. And even that 30 minutes of walking the dog, I did love the elliptical, just to get my heart rate up. And my doctor told me at that point, he said, you know, I want you, if you can do this, I want you to consider doing a massage, like a massage envy, because you've got to have something to release since you're not able to work out. So that something to, you know, physical, keeping your body, eating healthy, trying not to drink too much wine or beer or whatever your poison is. So I just, you know, I want you guys to know that you have a great opportunity. I think you've probably got a really good tribe here with, you know, you've probably formed some great relationships here this weekend. I know when I went to our Rodan and Fields event, I came back and have friendships that I know are going to last forever. And we support each other on social media. And so I just encourage you to take this opportunity. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. Whatever it is that you are struggling with, whatever it is, if it's a relationship, if it's some addiction in someone else, you have within yourself, but don't be afraid to ask for help. And lean on the people that you trust, because, you know, when everything falls apart, you've got to find a way to get through, and you need a place to find hope. And so I'm going to close by showing you the light of my life. He's my little sugar pie. And this is Frank. This is at the Mitchell's Fund luncheon. We include him. And he keeps me very busy. He misses his brother. I did not mean for him to be an only child, and he gets lonely. He doesn't have a playmate. But we have had him in play therapy, again, back to the mental health piece, asking for help. I put him in play therapy before I even started counseling because I'm an adult, I have a close relationship with my minister, I'm able to communicate my feelings. He went through a lot. I mean, I essentially had to neglect him during Mitchell's illness. And that was hard for me, but I had no choice. And then everything with his dad and my marriage, and now he goes to separate houses. And, you know, it's just, but the thing I'm most proud of is how well-adjusted Frank is. And now he's a little booger, but he's got a big personality, and he understands his Christian faith more than most people. He is very in touch with what death means, and because he lost his grandmother afterward. But he is, that and doing the work of Mitchell's Fund are what keep me going. And I just know that there's a reason God gave this to me, and I believe the reason is so that I can use it to help other people. And I hope that I have helped you today, and I don't want you to feel sorry for me. Because I will see my baby again. And all y'all's babies and mine are going to grow up, and they're going to do great things. But when I get to heaven, that precious little boy is going to be waiting on me. And he was just starting to say no. So he went right before it really got where it's mine, I do it myself. So just know that I know what my purpose is, and it is, you know, it feels good. Thank you.